Colonel, I want to start tonight with the most uncomfortable question I have asked you all year. Did Donald Trump just hand the 21st century to Beijing on a silver tray? Because if you look at what came out of the Hong Kong markets this morning, what the bond traders in Singapore are writing in their morning notes, what the European foreign ministries are quietly cabling back to their capitals, the answer is starting to look like yes. And I think the American public has no idea how close we are to that conclusion being permanent. Talk us through it. Well, Judge, I am afraid I have to start by agreeing with you, and I do not say that lightly. This is the kind of moment that historians spend the next 50 years trying to date. And I think when they finally pin it down, the date will end up being sometime this autumn, when the last few dominoes fell. The basic problem we keep having in Washington is that we mistake activity for strategy. The president, he confuses motion with progress. He confuses tariffs with leverage. He confuses bombing with deterrence. And the Chinese, Judge, they have been watching all of this very carefully for the better part of a decade. They have a generation of analysts at the Central Party School in Beijing who do nothing but study American decision-making. And I'll tell you something most people do not know. They were as surprised as we were when Trump won in 2016. They had not modeled it. But by the time the second administration arrived, they had built a full playbook. They had a complete model of how he reacts to pressure, how he interprets gestures, how he reads a room. And they have been playing that model like a piano for 9 months now. Every time he has imposed a tariff, they have responded with a measure that is calibrated not to escalate, but to redirect. Every time he has threatened, they have answered by going somewhere else. And the somewhere else now adds up to something I think we have to call a structural pivot, not a gesture, not a posture, a pivot. And once a pivot of that magnitude completes, you do not reverse it inside a single election cycle. You do not reverse it inside a decade. Colonel, you said the somewhere else adds up. Walk our viewers through what the somewhere else actually looks like. Because I think most Americans, even ones who watch this show every week, do not know what the BRICS expansion has actually delivered or what the Belt and Road balance sheet looks like in 2026. Give us the numbers. Sure. So, the BRICS bloc, when it started, was almost a joke in Washington. It was Brazil and Russia and India and China and South Africa. And the consensus inside the Pentagon and inside Foggy Bottom was that these countries had nothing in common and would never coordinate on anything serious. That was the consensus in 2010. That was the consensus in 2015. That was the consensus, frankly, in 2022. Today, the BRICS bloc has 14 full members. It includes Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Egypt, Indonesia, Argentina, and Ethiopia. They have a combined gross domestic product of roughly $32 trillion on a purchasing power parity basis, which puts them ahead of the G7 by every honest measure. About 41% of all global oil production now happens inside that bloc. About 47% of global agricultural output happens inside that bloc. And here is the part that should keep the Treasury awake at night. They are now settling roughly a quarter of their cross-border trade in currencies that are not the United States dollar. The yuan, the rupee, the dirham, the ruble. The dollar share of bilateral settlements between BRICS members has fallen from 88% in 2015 to about 71% today. That is the slow leak. That is the leak that does not make headlines. But it is the leak that determines whether your grandchildren live in a country that can borrow money cheaply or a country that has to pay 8% to roll over its debt every year. And nobody is talking about that 71% number on cable news, Colonel. Nobody. Of course, nobody is talking about it. Because if you talk about it, you have to admit that the strategy of the last decade has failed. I had a conversation, this was about 3 months ago, with a friend of mine who runs a logistics company out of Rotterdam. Big operation, moves containers between Northern Europe and Southeast Asia. And he told me something I had not appreciated. He said 2 years ago, about 60% of his contracts were priced in dollars. Today, less than 30%. The shift happened almost entirely in the last 18 months. And I asked him why. He said it was not ideology. It was not politics. It was insurance. He said his clients had watched what we did to Russia in 2022 when we cut them out of the dollar clearing system, and his clients had decided that they could not run their business if their entire supply chain depended on a currency that the United States might decide to weaponize against them next week. So they built alternatives. They priced new contracts in euros and in yuan. They opened accounts at Chinese banks. They started using the cross-border interbank payment system, the CIPS system, that the People's Bank of China runs out of Shanghai. And once those rails were built, Judge, you cannot dismantle them. The infrastructure exists. The relationships exist. The contracts exist. And every new American sanction, every new tariff, every new threat from the White House just gives more clients more reasons to use the new rails instead of the old ones. We are training the world to do without us, and we are doing it on purpose. Let's talk about the physical economy for a moment, Colonel. Rare earths, critical minerals, the actual materials that an industrial country needs to make things. Where does that stand right now? Look, this is the part that should be embarrassing to anybody who has held a senior position in American government over the last 20 years, and I include myself in that. We knew. We had reports on the desk of every Secretary of Defense going back to, certainly to 2010, telling us that we were dangerously dependent on Chinese refining capacity for the materials that go into every modern weapon system, and we did nothing about it. So now, the Chinese are not even being subtle about it anymore. They have imposed export licenses on gallium, on germanium, on graphite, on tungsten, on 6 different rare earth elements. They control about 87% of the world's rare earth refining capacity, even on the materials that are not mined inside China. They mine maybe 70%. They refine 87%. The difference matters. And in the last 6 months, they have been issuing export licenses very selectively. They are still selling to South Korea. They are still selling to Germany. They are still selling to Japan. They are slowing the licenses to American defense contractors and to a couple of European firms with significant American defense exposure. They are not announcing this publicly. They are doing it quietly through the licensing pipeline. The Pentagon has put out internal estimates that the production of certain advanced munitions could be slowed by between 30 and 60% over the next 24 months. And there is no domestic alternative. We have one rare earth refinery in California that is barely operational. One refinery for the entire country. One refinery. And, I had a young Marine officer, Lieutenant Colonel, write to me a few weeks ago. He had been on a procurement panel reviewing the supply chain for a class of guided munitions that I will not name in detail because the program is technically still classified, but it is one you have heard of. And he told me that the panel had identified 47 separate components in the weapon that came at some stage of refining or assembly from Chinese-controlled supply. 47 components in one weapon. He said the panel asked the program manager what the contingency plan was if Beijing simply stopped exporting. And the program manager said off the record that the contingency plan was to pray. That is a quote. The contingency plan was to pray. And I want your viewers to understand what this means. We are spending close to $1 trillion a year on defense. We have the most expensive military on Earth by a factor of 3. And the people responsible for actually building the weapons that military uses are telling each other in private that if the Chinese cut us off, we have nothing. There is no plan. There is no stockpile. There is no domestic industry waiting in reserve. We dismantled the industrial base that built those things 30 years ago, and we sent it to Asia, and now Asia owns it. Colonel, talk to us about the Global South. Because everybody who watches this channel knows that Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, those are the populations that are going to grow over the next 30 years. Where are they pivoting? They are gone, Judge. They are gone. And I do not say that with any pleasure. I have spent time in West Africa. I have friends in Lagos and in Accra and in Nairobi. And the conversations I have with them today are completely different from the conversations I had with them 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the United States was still seen as the natural development partner. The country you turned to when you needed credit, when you needed infrastructure, when you needed legitimacy on the international stage. Today, that conversation is over. The Chinese have built, by some estimates, more than 6,000 kilometers of rail and more than 100,000 kilometers of road across the African continent in the last 15 years. They have built ports. They have built power plants. They have built telecommunications networks. They have done it without lecturing anybody about democracy or human rights. They have done it on faster timelines and at lower delivered cost than anything we ever offered. And the punchline, Judge, is that when an African finance minister is choosing between a Chinese loan that comes with a 5-year construction timeline and an American development package that comes with a 30-month diplomatic review and a list of governance conditions, that finance minister is not going to flip a coin. The choice has already been made. We just have not noticed yet because we do not pay attention. The same dynamic is now playing out in Latin America, in Central Asia, in the Pacific Island nations, in Southeast Asia. The pivot is not coming. The pivot is finished. Before we get to history, Colonel, one more frontier. Artificial intelligence. The chip wars. Where do we actually stand right now? We are losing on that front too, Judge, and we are losing faster than people understand. 3 years ago, the consensus was that the United States had a 5 to 7 year lead on China in advanced semiconductors and in the artificial intelligence systems that ride on top of them. Today, that lead is maybe 18 months, and it is shrinking. The Chinese have built their own fabrication plants. Huawei is producing 7 nanometer chips at scale, which a lot of people in our intelligence community said was impossible 2 years ago. The DeepSeek models came out of Hangzhou and matched the performance of American models that cost 10 times as much to train. We responded with an export control regime that was supposed to choke off their access to advanced lithography equipment. What it actually did, Judge, was force them to build a domestic equivalent. They are now producing their own deep ultraviolet photolithography prototypes. The American export ban accelerated their independence by about 3 years, by the most credible estimates. And the Dutch government, which controls ASML, the only firm in the world that makes the most advanced of these machines, is now openly debating whether to keep cooperating with American sanctions at all. Once ASML breaks ranks, the entire export control regime collapses overnight. And every analyst I trust thinks ASML is one bad meeting away from doing exactly that. Give me a historical analogy, Colonel, because I keep trying to find one and I am coming up empty. The closest analogy I can give you is Suez 1956. And I want your viewers to understand why. In November of 1956, the British government, working with the French and the Israelis, decided to invade Egypt to seize the Suez Canal. They had the military capability. They had the diplomatic cover. They had everything except American support. And President Eisenhower, he just picked up the phone and he told Anthony Eden in London that if the British did not withdraw, the United States would crash the British pound on the international markets. And Eden looked at the numbers and realized that he could not finance the operation without American backing. And he withdrew. Within 72 hours, the British Empire was effectively over. Now, the empire continued on paper for another 15 or 20 years. The Queen kept being Queen. The flag kept flying over a few colonial outposts. But the moment of empire, the moment when the world believed that London was the center of decisions that mattered, that moment ended in November of 1956. And every diplomat in the world knew it. We are at our Suez moment right now, Judge. The Chinese are not going to crash the dollar. They do not have to. They are simply going to stop needing it. And once the global trading system stops needing the dollar to function, we are no longer the country that decides what happens. The flag will keep flying. The president will keep making speeches. The aircraft carriers will keep putting to sea, but the moment of empire will be over. And every diplomat in the world will know it the same way every diplomat in 1956 knew it. Colonel, what does this mean in practical terms for the family watching this video tonight in Tulsa or in Dayton or in Phoenix? Walk us through what they are going to feel. Well, they are going to feel it in 3 places. They are going to feel it in the price of every imported good, which is going to keep rising for at least the next 4 to 6 years, regardless of what any politician promises. They are going to feel it in the interest rate on every loan, because as the demand for the dollar drops, the cost of borrowing it has to rise to compensate. And that means mortgages, car loans, credit cards, and the federal debt. The Treasury is going to be paying a higher rate to roll over its existing borrowing, and that higher rate is going to come out of the same federal budget that pays for everything else. So services either get cut or taxes go up. There is no third option. And third, they are going to feel it in employment because American manufacturers who lose their export markets are going to lay people off. The estimates I have seen, and these are not partisan estimates, these are coming from the Federal Reserve regional banks and from a couple of business school think tanks. The estimates are that we are looking at between 800,000 and 1.2 million American manufacturing jobs that disappear over the next 36 months as a direct result of the trade strategy that has been pursued. Those are not numbers a politician can spin. Those are people. Those are families. Those are towns that empty out. And the people who made the decisions that put us here will not be in office to take responsibility when the consequences arrive. One last question, Colonel. If a sane president walked into the Oval Office tomorrow morning, what is the first thing he or she could do? Honestly, Judge, the first thing a sane president could do is be quiet for 90 days. Just stop talking. Stop tweeting, posting, threatening, bombing, sanctioning, lecturing. Stop everything. Because right now, we are losing leverage every time we open our mouths, and the world has stopped listening to what we say and started watching what we do instead. The second thing would be to call the Treasury Secretary and the Federal Reserve Chair into the Oval Office and ask them point blank what the dollar's reserve status will look like in 2030 if current trends continue, and then act on the honest answer. The honest answer, by the way, is that the dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 72% in 2000 to about 58% today, and it will be below 50% within a decade unless we change course. The third thing, and this is the hardest, would be to begin rebuilding the relationships we have shredded with our actual allies. Canada, Mexico, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Australia.